Right, so before we get into this, I need to warn you. Some of what you're about to see doesn't appear on any tourist map. Some of it doesn't even appear on most local maps. Manchester is one of the most recognizable cities in the world, right? Football, music, the Northern Quarter, the Arndale. That's the Manchester people talk about. But there's another Manchester, a version of it that nobody advertises, nobody promotes, and honestly, a version that certain people would rather you just forgot existed entirely. Today we're going into that version. 11 places across Greater Manchester that were once thriving, breathing, living communities, and are now silent. Some of them are genuinely eerie, some of them are heartbreaking, and some of them will make you question everything you thought you knew about this city. Let's go. Number 11. Abandoned Barton upon Irwell. Now, most people who know this name know it because of the Barton Swing Aqueduct, which is genuinely one of the most spectacular pieces of Victorian engineering anywhere in Britain. But they don't know about the village that essentially ceased to exist to make way for the Manchester Ship Canal. When construction on that canal began in the late 19th century, the village of Barton upon Irwell was largely cleared. Homes, roads, the entire geography of the place was altered beyond recognition. What remained was fragments, scattered remnants of a community that once had its own rhythm, its own identity. If you walk the towpaths along the right sections today, you can still find traces, old foundations poking through the grass, patterns in the ground that only make sense once you realize they used to be streets. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like the earth itself is trying to remember something. Number 10. Wythenshaw's Forgotten Estates. Now hold on before you click away because this one is more complex than it sounds. Wythenshawe was built as a garden city, this ambitious social housing experiment in the 1930s, designed to give working-class families space and greenery and dignity. But within Wythenshawe, there are pockets of land, specific sections of certain estates, where communities that were established in that original vision were later demolished or simply abandoned as regeneration priorities shifted. These micro-ghost communities within a larger living area are genuinely overlooked. Streets that once had hundreds of residents now sit behind hoardings. The contrast between the lived-in streets just meters away and these silent patches of cleared land is striking in a way that a photograph alone cannot fully capture. Number 9. Clifton, Salford. Now technically Clifton sits at the edge of what most people would consider Salford, and it's got a fascinating and deeply tragic industrial history tied entirely to mining. The Clifton Hall Colliery was once a major employer in the area. When the pit closed, the economic foundation of the surrounding community essentially collapsed. Houses were left. Whole streets fell into disrepair. The area has seen various attempts at regeneration over the decades, but there are corners of Old Clifton that feel genuinely frozen in time. Old pit infrastructure rusting quietly behind overgrown hedges. Workers' cottages where the architecture still speaks to an era that no longer exists. The ghost here isn't a building, it's an entire way of life. Number 8. Hoaf End and the cleared sporting lands. Alright, this one is slightly different because Hoaf End in Chorlton is actually still used as a sports ground. But what many people don't know is the history of what existed on and around this land before it became what it is today. There were structures and facilities here, community infrastructure that was gradually dismantled as land use changed and priorities shifted across the 20th century. Some local historians have documented the oral histories of people who remember facilities that simply no longer exist. Buildings that have vanished so completely that finding evidence of them requires serious archival work. The ghost here is in the absence of things that should be there but aren't. Number 7. Mostyn's Industrial Quarter. Mostyn in North Manchester is a name that people recognize but don't often investigate, and the industrial eastern end of the neighborhood carries the bones of a manufacturing past that has almost entirely evaporated. There are old mill buildings here that have been boarded up for so long that young people living in the surrounding streets have never seen them used for anything. The graffiti on the walls is itself historic at this point. Layers of it, years of it, building up like geological strata over the original brickwork. Walking through this part of Mostyn feels like moving through a timeline that somebody just stopped updating at some point in the mid-1980s. Number 6. The Lost Hamlet of Medlock Vale. The River Medlock runs through Manchester in a way that most residents are only vaguely aware of. It was culverted, redirected, and essentially hidden from public view across large sections of the city. But along the sections where it still runs more openly, particularly in the east, there are traces of old habitation, small clusters of building remnants that speak to communities that lived and worked along this river long before the city swallowed everything. These aren't documented with any great fanfare. You won't find them on heritage trail leaflets. They exist in the margins, and finding them requires a willingness to look in places where most people simply don't bother to look. Number 5. Ancoats before the rebirth. Now, Ancoats today is hip. Coffee shops, renovated mills, young professionals on fixed gear bikes. But before the regeneration wave hit, Ancoats was something much darker and much more interesting. There are sections of old Ancoats, particularly around some of the back streets and canal side plots, that the regeneration money hasn't reached yet. Places where the original Victorian terraced workers' housing still stands, or rather leans, in various states of total collapse. Places where you can see directly into roofless rooms, where staircases lead upward to floors that no longer exist. The juxtaposition of the trendy new Ancoats and this raw, unrestored version existing just streets apart is one of the most powerful visual experiences you can have in Manchester without spending a single penny. Number 4. Reddish Vale and the Old Bleach Works. Reddish Vale. Country Park is a genuinely beautiful green space that most Mancunians drive straight past, on their way somewhere else. But within the park and along the River Tame, there are extensive remains of a bleachworks complex that once employed significant numbers of local people. The industrial archaeology here is remarkable. Stone structures, water channels, remnants of machinery and infrastructure, all sitting in the middle of what is now a nature reserve. Nature has made serious progress in reclaiming the site. Trees grow through old walls. Vegetation has swallowed what were once working buildings. It's the kind of place where the beauty of the natural world and the melancholy of industrial decline exist in almost perfect balance. Number 3. Bradford Colliery and Beswick's Ghost Landscape. Bradford Colliery sits in East Manchester, and its closure left one of the most dramatically altered landscapes in the entire Greater Manchester area. The colliery itself was demolished, the spoil heaps were cleared and landscaped, and the land was repurposed. But the community that existed around it, the network of streets and houses that housed the miners and their families, was largely cleared too, as part of successive regeneration schemes. What you're left with is an area of East Manchester, where the landscape itself feels slightly wrong, slightly too open. Like a page where someone has erased the writing, but you can still see the indentations left behind by the pen. People who grew up in the streets that no longer exist come back to stand in open fields and point at the air and say, "That's where my front door was." Number 2. Middleton Junction. This one deserves significantly more attention than it gets. Middleton Junction was a railway junction settlement that grew up entirely because of the railway, that peculiarly Victorian phenomenon where a community would crystallize around a junction, a station, a point of industrial significance. When the railway importance of the junction declined, so did the community. Buildings were demolished over time. The station itself has a fragmented and complicated history. What remains now is a collection of spaces that feel disconnected from each other in the way that only happens when the thing that originally connected them has been removed. It's architecturally confused in a way that is genuinely fascinating if you're willing to spend time there and piece together what it used to be. And number 1, Pomona Island. Pomona is the most extraordinary place on this entire list. Technically, it's a peninsula rather than an island, sitting between the Bridgewater Canal and the Manchester Ship Canal in Trafford. For much of the 20th century, it was docklands. Before that, it was a pleasure gardens, a genuinely grand Victorian entertainment venue that drew massive crowds from across the region. The docks closed, the pleasure gardens were long gone. And for decades, Pomona sat in this extraordinary liminal state, this strip of scrubby urban wilderness sandwiched between major transport corridors, hidden from view behind concrete barriers and canal embankments. The Metrolink now has a Pomona stop, which tells you that development pressure has been building. But at various points over the last 2 decades, Pomona represented one of the most genuinely wild, genuinely forgotten urban spaces anywhere in England. Wildlife moved in, artists moved in, guerrilla gardeners moved in, and the whole thing existed in this strange, uncertain space between past and future, with the present almost entirely absent. Now, here's the thing that ties all 11 of these places together, and it's something worth sitting with for a moment. Cities don't forget accidentally. The erasure of communities, the disappearance of streets and neighborhoods and ways of life, these things happen through decisions. Planning decisions, investment decisions, political decisions. The ghost towns of Manchester aren't ghosts because something mysterious happened to them. They're ghosts because at some point, somebody decided that what existed there was worth less than what could replace it. And sometimes what replaced it was genuinely better for more people. And sometimes what replaced it was just a car park. The deeper you go into Manchester's forgotten corners, the more you start to see the city not as a fixed thing, not as the place it is right now, but as a constant process of construction and destruction and memory and forgetting. Every piece of cleared wasteland was once someone's front street. Every derelict mill was once someone's entire working world. Every empty plot was once a community. If this video has done anything, I hope it's made you want to slow down the next time you're moving through the city. Not just Manchester, any city. Because the places that don't look like anything, the scrubby bits of land between the roads, the boarded up buildings, the overgrown patches behind chain link fences, those are where the real history lives. Not in the museums, not in the tourist trails. Out there in the margins, waiting for someone to notice. If you know about a forgotten corner of Manchester that didn't make this list, I genuinely want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below. Not because I'm crowdsourcing content, but because this kind of local knowledge is genuinely fragile and genuinely valuable, and if we don't document it somewhere, it disappears. And subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into the places that cities would rather you didn't find. We're just getting started.